Swiss Family Robinson, Chapter 8 The Return Home. As soon as morning dawned, I hasted on deck, and with the help of a telescope, I saw my wife looking towards us, observed with pleasure the flag which denoted their safety, floating in the breeze. After enjoying a breakfast of biscuit, ham, and wine, we set out devising some means of saving our cattle. Fritz suggested a raft. But even if we could contrive one sufficiently large, how were we to get all those animals to remain still on it? At last, Fritz proposed swimming belts, and we spent 2 hours in making and fixing them. For the cow and the donkey, it was necessary to have an empty cask on each side, well bound in strong sailcloth, fastened by leather thongs over the back and under each animal. For the rest, we merely tied a piece of cork under their bodies and fastened a cord to the horns or neck of each animal, with a slip of wood at the end for a convenient handle. And now came the difficulty of launching our living freight into the sea. Luckily, the waves had already broken a large hole in the side of the ship and left an opening wide enough for the cattle to pass through. We therefore led them to the lower part of the ship and made the first experiment by giving the donkey a push into the water. He fell with great force and rose struggling to the surface, but quickly recovering himself, he floated away in grand style. The cow was of far more value than the donkey. I felt very anxious about her, but I pushed her in gently and with equal success. We managed easily to get the whole afloat, excepting the sow, who resisted furiously. When at last she was forced into the water, she swam quickly away and made for shore, which she reached long before the rest of us. We now embarked and discovered the advantage of our mast and sail, for the wind carried us gently toward the shore. Loaded as we were, we could never have rowed our boat. Suddenly, a loud cry from Fritz filled me with terror. "Father," he exclaimed, "we're lost. See what an enormous fish! It is coming towards us." The bold boy had seized his gun, and by my directions aimed and fired at the head of the monstrous shark as it was preparing to seize one of the sheep. It immediately plunged and disappeared, leaving a long red track of blood behind, which showed that it was severely wounded. I again took the rudder, and as the wind blew favorably towards the bay, guided the boat to a convenient landing place. We set the animals free from the guiding ropes, and they all scrambled safely on shore. There was no sign of my wife or children, but a few moments afterward they appeared, and with a shout of joy ran towards us. We were thankful to be once more united, and proceeded to release our herd from their swimming belts, which, though so useful in the water, were exceedingly inconvenient on shore. After which we sat down to recount our adventures. Fritz, Ernest, and I next began the work of unloading our craft, while Jack, seeing that the poor donkey was still encumbered with his swimming belt, tried to free him from it. But the donkey would not stand quiet, and the boy's fingers were not strong enough to loosen the cordage. He therefore scrambled upon the animal's back and trotted towards us. "Come, my boy," I said. "No one must be idle here, even for a moment. You will have riding practice enough hereafter. Dismount and come and help us." Jack was soon on his feet. "But I had not been idle all day," he said. "Look here," and he pointed to a broad belt of yellow skin round his wrist, in which he had stuck a couple of pistols and a knife. "And see," he added, "I have made for the dogs." The dogs came at his call, and I saw that each of them was provided with a collar of similar material, stuck full of nails, which bristled round their necks in a more formidable manner. "Well done, my boy," said I. "Where did you get your materials, and who helped you?" "He had no assistance," said my wife. "And as for the materials, Fritz's jaguar supplied the skin, and the needles and thread came out of my wonderful bag." Fritz expressed his annoyance at hearing that Jack had cut up the jaguar's skin, but I reminded him that he must act like a man and not show anger at little things. Besides, on nearing the tent, he discovered that the body of the animal was already becoming offensive, and he was glad to help to drag it down to the sea and so get rid of it. By this time, the unloading of our boat was nearly accomplished, and we started for our tent. Finding no preparation for supper, I said, "Fritz, go and bring the Welsfalen ham," from which we breakfasted out of the tub. Fritz soon got the ham and carried it to his mother triumphantly, while Ernest set before me a dozen white balls of parchment-like coverings, which he had found during the morning's ramble. "Turtle's eggs," said I. "Well done, Ernest." While my wife prepared supper, we returned to the boat and brought up the remainder of our cargo, collected our herd of animals, and again repaired to the tent. An excellent meal awaited us. My wife had improvised a table of board laid on 2 casks, and on this was spread a white damask tablecloth on which were placed knives, forks, spoons, and plates for each person. A tureen of good soup first appeared, followed by a captain omelet, then slices of ham, and finally some cheese, butter, and biscuits. After we had regaled ourselves, I requested my wife to relate her adventures during my absence. "The first day," said my good Elizabeth, "I spent in anxiety about you and attending to signals, but this morning, being satisfied that we had nothing to fear, I began to look about for the shady and sheltered spot for our tent. I believe this barren shore has not a single tree, so I decided to search for a more comfortable spot for our residence, and determined to set out with the children on the journey of discovery across the river. We took our game bags and hunting knives, and the boys each carried a gun and a stock of provisions, whilst I had a large flask of water and a small hatchet. The dogs went before. Turk, evidently considering himself our guide, and with some difficulty we crossed the river. I now saw that the advantage of your having so early taught the boys to use firearms, for as defense depended almost entirely on 2 boys of 10 and 12 years of age. We reached the hill you described to us, and I was charmed with the smiling prospect, but I was determined to make our way towards a beautiful and shady wood we had in view. It was a most painful and harassing progress through grass, reeds, and that were higher than the children's heads. All at once we were startled by a strange rustling around, and a bird of large size rose and flew away. Before the boys could get their guns ready, they were much mortified, and I recommended them to have their guns in readiness, for the birds would not be likely to wait till they loaded them. "I am sure," said Francis, "the bird must be an eagle, it was so large." But Ernest ridiculed the idea, and thought it was like a bustard. They were getting into hot discussion on the subject when suddenly another bird of the same kind sprang up close to our feet and was soon soaring above our heads. I could not help laughing to see the look of confusion with which the boys followed it with their eyes. At last Jack took off his hat and, making a low bow, said, "Pray, Mr. Bird, be kind enough to pay us another visit, but adieu for the present." We searched for and found the large nest they had left. It was very rudely formed in dry grass and was empty. Some fragments of eggshells were scattered near, as if the young had been recently hatched. We therefore concluded that they had escaped among the grass. Chatting together, we at last reached the grove. Numbers of unknown birds fluttered among the high trees, and seemed to welcome us with their song. We found, however, that what we thought the wood was merely a group of a dozen trees, but of height far beyond any that I have seen, with trunks apparently springing from roots which formed a series of supporting arches. Jack climbed one of the arches and measured the trunk of the tree with a piece of string. He found it to be 34 feet round. I made 32 paces round the roots. Between the roots and the highest branches, it seemed about 40 or 50 feet high. The foliage was abundant, the branches thick and strong, and the leaves of moderate size, resembling our walnut tree. A thick, short, velvety turf carpeted the ground beneath and around the roots of the tree, inviting us to repose. And altogether, this was one of the most delightful spots that the mind could conceive. Here we sat down and made our noonday meal. A clear stream which ran near furnished its agreeable waters for our refreshment. I so delighted with the spot that I could not but think that if we could contrive a dwelling on the branches of one of these trees, we should be in perfect peace and safety. On our return, we took the road by the seashore. We found a large quantity of timber, chests, and casks floated from the wreck, all too heavy to bring home, but we succeeded in dragging and rolling several of these waifs from the vessel up the beach. Our dogs, in the meantime, employed themselves in fishing for a kind of crab, which they appeared to eat with relish. and I now saw they would be able to furnish their own food as we rested from our hard labor. I saw Juno scratching in the sand and swallowing something with great avidity. "They are turtles' eggs," said Ernest. We therefore drove away the dogs and gathered about 24 of them. While we were depositing this unexpected prize in our provision bags, we were astonished at the sight of a sail. Ernest said he was certain it was Papa and Fritz, though Frank feared it should be the savages who visited Robinson Crusoe's island coming to eat us up. We were soon, however, enabled to calm his fears. Hastening to the river, we crossed it by leaping from stone to stone and arrived at the landing place to greet you on our safe return. While listening to my wife's narration of the day's adventures, night came on. We knelt together in prayer and then arranged ourselves in our places as usual, sleeping soundly and with great comfort upon the mattresses and under the soft coverlets which had brought from the wreck.